Ladies and gentlemen, there is a certain silence that surrounds the woman who lives alone. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of depth. Society often stares at her through a fog of misunderstanding, projecting onto her 1,000 stories that are not her own. They say she is incomplete, lonely, perhaps even broken, but they rarely ask, what is she listening to in that silence? The truth is not found in what she has walked away from, but in what she is walking toward. A woman who chooses solitude is not merely without a man, she is with herself. And that is no small thing. It is in fact the beginning of everything. For when a woman turns inward, when she sits with her own thoughts, her own pain, her own longing, she steps onto the sacred path of becoming. She is no longer defined by what the world reflects back to her. She begins to see herself through her own inner mirror. This path is not one of retreat, but of revelation. She is not rejecting love, she is rejecting illusion. She refuses to be a mirror for someone else's dreams until she has first held the mirror up to herself. She is not waiting to be chosen, she has already chosen herself. And in that radical act, she is reborn. This woman does not live in isolation. She lives in dialogue with the deeper forces of life, with nature, with spirit, with the archetypes that rise up in dreams and symbols. She speaks to the old soul within her, the sovereign self that does not ask for permission. She has entered the realm where myths are born, where the wild and wise feminine awakens. And yes, this journey can be fierce. There are nights of great shadow, but there is also clarity, the kind that can only come when one has been stripped of the noise of rules, expectations, and masks. In that clarity, a woman does not become hard, she becomes real. So let us stop asking her why she is alone. Instead, let us ask ourselves why we fear the woman who needs no validation, who finds her strength in solitude, and who lives not by the script, but by the soul. When a woman chooses to live alone, the world often sees absence where there is presence, and emptiness where there is depth. She is viewed through the collective lens as having stepped outside of the expected order, out of the narratives of marriage, partnership, and relational identity. But beneath the surface of this choice lies a far more complex sacred journey, the movement toward individuation. Individuation is the process by which one becomes whole, not in the eyes of others, but in the truth of the self. For women, this path has often been interrupted, suppressed, or redirected into the needs and identities of others. To live alone, to walk into solitude willingly, is not a rejection of love or community. It is a return to the original task of becoming. It is a declaration that before she belongs to another, she must belong to herself. In solitude, distractions fall away. The rules she once performed for the world begin to dissolve. The dutiful daughter, the attentive lover, the smiling caretaker. What rises in their place is not immediately clear or comfortable. Instead, it is a slow emergence of the true inner landscape, often long neglected. In this quiet space, she meets the parts of herself she once kept hidden, the forgotten, the suppressed rage, the unspoken yearning, the ancient wisdom. They all surface, not to haunt her, but to be integrated. The outer world may continue its rituals of misunderstanding. It may whisper that she is lonely, that something is missing, but she knows something deeper, that what the world calls loneliness is often the first stage of transformation. The loneliness is real, yes, but it is the loneliness of shedding old skins. It is the ache that comes from confronting the void before something new and authentic can be born. It is the womb of the psyche preparing for rebirth. In solitude, the feminine soul begins to realign not with society's definitions of success or fulfillment, but with her own inner truth. She begins to feel her way into her instincts, dreams, and quiet intuitions. She reconnects with the lunar rhythms, the shadowed aspects of her being that were never welcomed into polite society. She learns to trust what cannot be rationalized. She learns to speak the language of symbols. And in doing so, she becomes dangerous to a world that prefers women compliant, predictable, and afraid of their own death. But she does not do this to become powerful in the eyes of the world. She does it because the soul will not let her do otherwise. This journey inward is not glamorous. It does not come with applause, but it is sacred and it demands everything. It is in the silence of her room, in the evenings of aloneness, that she begins to piece together her authentic self. Not the self built on duty or desire, but the one built on soul. She dreams, she writes, she weeps, she listens, she heals. Slowly, a new center of gravity forms within her. No longer does she abandon herself to be chosen. She begins to inhabit her own life. And this is the hidden truth. When a woman lives alone without a man, she is often not retreating from the world, but returning to the root of her being. She is not empty. She is pregnant with becoming. The world may call it solitude, but she knows it as initiation. She walks alone, not because she has failed to find love, but because she has dared to find herself. A woman who lives alone often does so not because she has turned her back on connection, but because she has chosen to step outside of a story that was never fully hers. There is a myth, quiet but persistent, that a woman's identity is fulfilled only in the gaze of a man, that she becomes complete when she is desired, named, or claimed by another. This is not just cultural, it is deeply psychological. For centuries, women had been cast as mirrors, reflecting back to others their hopes, wounds, and longings, especially those of men. When a woman refuses this role, when she chooses to inhabit her own narrative rather than someone else's projection, she disrupts something ancient and invisible. She steps out of the archetype of the muse, the helper, the nurturer, whose value is drawn from what she evokes in another. And in doing so, she refuses to be reduced to the anima, a vessel for someone else's unconscious needs. To reject this projection is not a simple act of rebellion. It is a deep psychological realignment. It is the decision to no longer be an image in another's dream, but the author of her own. This act requires clarity, and it demands a fierce tenderness with the self. For many women, the habit of being seen, desired, and defined externally has been reinforced since childhood. To lay it down is to experience a kind of death, the death of the persona that once ensured belonging. And yet, in this death, there is also tremendous liberation, because projection is, by its nature, dehumanizing. It replaces the reality of the person with a fantasy. A woman who lives alone is often one who has tired of being someone else's fantasy. She longs instead to be real, even if realness means being misunderstood, unseen, or even feared. In her solitude, she begins to see herself as she truly is, not as she has been imagined. This work is quiet, slow, and often invisible to the outside world. She begins to dismantle the internalized gaze. She catches the thoughts that say she is more worthy when desired. She notices how her moods shift when no one is watching. She feels the urge to perform, and she sits with it instead of acting on it. She grieves the parts of herself that were loved only conditionally, and she begins to trust her own inner voice, not the one trained to please or to seduce, but the one that knows. To live without the projection of another is to enter into profound self-encounter. This is not the narcissism of self-absorption, but the deep work of self-possession. The woman who lives alone does not need to be admired to know she has worth. She does not need to be pursued to know she is magnetic. She no longer needs to be chosen to feel real. She is real because she is. Of course, love may still come, But if it does, it will be of a different kind. It will not be built on illusion or the need to complete what is broken in another. It will be rooted in truth. Two whole beings meeting not to escape themselves, but to walk beside one another with open eyes. And that kind of love can only arise when the projection has been withdrawn and the self has been claimed. So the woman who lives alone is not empty of relationship. She is full of clarity. She has rejected the role of mirror and in doing so has turned toward her own image. Wild, complex and deeply human, she does not live to be watched. She lives to be whole. And in a world built on reflections, that is a radical act. There comes a moment in a woman's solitude when the silence no longer feels like emptiness, but like presence. Not the presence of another, but the presence of something ancient and interior, something sovereign. It does not arrive with fanfare or proclamation. It does not speak loudly or make demands. It emerges slowly, like mist curling over a still lake at dawn. This is the self. Not a mask worn for the world, not a collection of traits others name, but a deep organizing center of the psyche. And in the quiet, a woman begins to hear speak. To reach this point, she has passed through fire. She has let go of mirrors, masks, and roles. She has descended into herself and walked through the corridors of grief, rage, longing, and shadow. She has sat in the disorientation of no longer being who she was, but not yet knowing who she will be. And it is precisely in that in-between that the true self makes itself known, not as a fantasy, but as an inner reality. This inner sovereign is not bound by time, gender, or social contract. It is not interested in approval or performance. It is whole, it is calm, it is quietly radiant. When a woman touches this part of herself, her life begins to shift, not necessarily in dramatic ways, but in subtle tectonic ones. She begins to move from within rather than in reaction. She speaks more slowly, listens more deeply, and no longer bargains with her value. She becomes rooted. To others, this shift may be unsettling. She no longer responds predictably. She no longer needs to prove or defend. She seems to belong to something invisible. People may call it confidence or mystery, but it is something more elemental. It is the result of having integrated the fragments within. It is the presence of someone who has become her own source. This sovereignty is not selfishness. It is not the hard shell of someone who has given up on others. Quite the opposite. It is what allows her to love without possession, to give without depletion, and to stand without needing to be held up. She has come into alignment with something unshakable. She has touched the still point within her, and it has become her throne. And from this place, life begins to reorganize itself. Choices become clearer, boundaries emerge naturally, creativity flows more freely, not as performance, but as expression. She is no longer grasping for meaning because she is living in it. Her solitude is no longer a pause between chapters, but a chapter in its own right, rich, sacred, alive. This is what most people cannot see when they look at the woman who lives alone. They see what is absent, but she knows what is present. They see a life without a man. She feels a life in which her soul has space to speak. They may imagine she is incomplete, but she has never felt more whole. She is not waiting, she is reigning from within. And should love find her again, it will not be the love that asks her to shrink, to bend, or to serve a role. It will be the kind of love that recognizes the sovereign in her and meets her not as savior or captor, but as equal and companion. But even if it does not come, she is not diminished. She has already met the beloved within, the one who has walked with her all along. To live alone is for some a wound, but for her it has been the sacred womb of becoming. In that stillness, the sovereign self has risen, not loud, not boastful, but quietly unshakable. And that is the truth few dare to speak, that the woman who lives without a man may be the one who has finally come home. If you'd like, I can help you stitch these three expansions into a cohesive essay or book chapter as well.
So let us speak plainly now about the woman who lives alone without a man, not with pity, not with suspicion, and certainly not with condescension. Let us see her for what she truly is, not abandoned, but awakened, not lacking, but listening, not incomplete, but in the profound process of becoming whole. Her solitude is not a void, it is a crucible. In that space, she sheds false narratives and inherited masks. She steps beyond the projections that once confined her and into the truth of her own reflection. And in doing so, she meets the most radical presence of all, her own soul. What we see from the outside may look like quiet, but inside a great fire is burning. She is not waiting for love to save her. She is becoming love itself. She is not seeking a crown from another. She has already crowned herself from within. She is not afraid of the silence anymore. She knows it as the sacred ground of her own emergence. And this truth is not just about women who live alone, it is a mirror for all of us, for anyone who has ever dared to step off the well worn path, to seek something deeper, to listen for a voice that is not handed down, but rises up from within. In honoring her path, we honor the path of every soul that longs to live not as an echo, but as a presence. So the next time you see a woman walking alone, do not ask what is missing from her life. Ask instead what she has found and listen